The bulletin, we're just going to mark through the bulletin. It says 2022, put 23 there. So all of you who were signed up to participate in the candlelight service, yep, you're back on board. Okay, so I have handouts. Sorry, I should have told you that earlier. So if anybody wants a handout, they're here in front of Brett, right here.
I'll hand some out.
Brett. Right here, Brett.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I need to get those out sooner. Just way out. So, our class is supposed to end at 11:15, and I will be able to do that, I think. But this is not a lecture. If you have thoughts or ideas or questions, or you're concerned about my car's extended warranty, just let me know, and we'll discuss it. So a couple questions here to start us out. Any thoughts on this? When is it easy to be a person of faith?
The day you're baptized.
The day you're baptized. Sure, you're up here on the mountaintop. Say again?
Sitting through class reading worship.
Sure, exactly. I was thinking the same thing. You go come to worship and all, it's easier to be a person of faith, right? So these are times where it's pretty easy to be a person of faith. So going on with that then, when is it more difficult to live as a person of faith? When do you find it difficult?
When you're secluded away from your core group of Christians that you worship.
What? Did you ever experience that?
Yes, I did.
We did. We lived in Greece.
When things are going wrong.
When things are going wrong. Oh man, that's a big one there. Did you look at my lesson notes? We're going to talk about that a little bit today. When things are going wrong is what Lisa Dunaway said. And that is true. Say again?
When you don't have any control.
When we don't have any control. And when do we realize we don't have any control?
Every day.
I mean, how much control do we really have? We like having some control over things. And don't get me wrong, I took control of my life and got the education I needed to become a chaplain in the Air Force. You have that kind of stuff, but, it took longer than what I had originally thought it would and other things like that. So some things weren't in my control as much. But yeah, we like to have control, and oftentimes we don't. And that really bothers us. Oftentimes it bothers us. We're going to look at these things a little bit today because, you see, talking about your faith, and we're talking about the empowering words of Jesus, when things don't go the way people like a lot of times, and these are so-called Christian people of faith, they lose their faith. Well, if God is not going to do this, then there must not be a God. Therefore, I don't believe in God. I have seen that happen. So sometimes faith can be a hard and challenging thing. 3 weeks ago, we emphasized empowering words Jesus speaks when life is difficult. That's what we talked about 3 weeks ago. Life is difficult. Talked about Jesus' words there. Yet when life becomes difficult, faith can become a difficult challenge. Man, if I could simply, as a preacher, get people to understand that you become a Christian, that does not mean life is going to be rosy from then on. There's still going to be struggles in your life. It's not like it gives you a get out of jail free, maybe a get out of hell free, but it does not mean that life is just going to become easy here while we live on earth. And I'll say this, almost all believers, and maybe I should say all believers, will eventually go through a period when God and faith don't seem to make sense. Yeah, I said that. Sometimes young Christians expect the new life to be trouble-free, and then they become disillusioned when they discover that believers are not protected from the common struggles of life. Some who have served God faithfully for many years can become angry when life becomes hard and disappointing. They assume that they deserve more from God for their days of service and devotion. Yeah, so I beat up on the younger folks, and now I'm beating up on the older folks because they say, well, I served for all these years. Don't I deserve better, God? And then when life starts to unravel, it's not uncommon to hear the cry, Lord, is this the way you treat your own? I thought you cared for me, but I must have been wrong. You know what? It's hard to believe in a God like that, Lord. There are occasions when circumstances of living become so painful and overwhelming that we begin to doubt the benefits of faith, and then we wonder, is it even worth it? Why should I give my time every week going to a worship in a God I no longer have faith in or I don't believe in? I'm talking to you about real stuff, folks. I'm talking to you about real stuff. And let me tell you this. You might be sitting there saying, oh, that never happened to me. Don't you ever say that would never happen to me. I learned years ago, watch out. I think I told y'all before, if I said right now, there is no way I'd ever rob a bank, by this afternoon I'd be down at Regent's Bank trying to break in and rob that place. All because I said I'd never do it.
There before the grace of God go on.
Yeah. What was that over here?
Maybe not the second.
Maybe that's not by tomorrow morning.
Well, if somebody calls you and threatens your entire family, you might do things that you think.
You're right. We saw that in Iraq when we become under indirect fire, because if somebody shoots at us, we shoot back, and we're funny that way. And they would do indirect fire, which means they would fire over into our base there where we were. Indirect meaning they couldn't target really anybody. They were just trying to hit an aircraft that was full of fuel, make a big boom. But they would shoot them, and they'd come in, mortars and all. Sometimes they would hit our barracks. But what they would do is the bad guys would kidnap a guy's daughter and hold her and say, you're going to go out there and fire that weapon. Because once it fired, we saw the heat, we fire on that place. So the guy's out there, he just fires this mortar, and it makes the heat signature. We're firing right back at that and usually taking them out. So, I mean, he had no choice. So hopefully that wouldn't happen. But you know, as far as me robbing a bank, but you can never tell what life will throw at you. I've encouraged people, and I say the same. Sometimes people say, well, I would never cheat on my husband or my wife. I'm afraid of saying things like that. Even though we might believe it, I almost, just Gary, this is only Gary. You don't have to agree with me. But I feel like if I say I'll never do something, I let this guard down. So if I say I would never lose my faith in God, I feel like I let a guard down. That's why I need to continue to build my faith, and I need to do faith-building things in my life. So when faith is hard, when faith is challenging, Jesus continues to speak.
You know, we have a tendency, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
We have a tendency to remove the seriousness of things we say, things we do, and it's just societal thing, really, that we just, remove the value of God and remove what the important things are and milk them down and make them seem like, oh, this and that, whatever. And no, that's the devil's slow play, slow game.
Yeah, yeah.
And it eats into every part of our life.
It does. It does. Evil is all about us, looking for a way to get into our lives. So, suffering is an inevitable and common experience of humanity. Early in life, health is good, troubles are minimal, it's easy to feel optimistic, it's easy to trust in God's protection and care, and many of us seem to be sheltered for a time from the horror and suffering, and our faith in God has very few bumps and turns, and perhaps we start believing life will continue untroubled and with no major difficulties. Psalm 10 verse 6 says, "Nothing will shake me. I'll always be happy and never have trouble." So the Psalms are poetry, right? And which means it's written as poetry. So that doesn't mean you go quoting that. Well, the Bible says nothing's ever going to shake me. I'll always be happy, so I should always be happy. That's not what it means. Yet inevitably, reality hits us in the face, and through illness or loss, we experience personally the truth that life is difficult, life is random, and oftentimes life is unfair.
It does say in Psalms that this is the wicked man talking, so maybe we don't want to.
Well,
Make our
yeah,
life
I just didn't
the
want to
same
take
way.
that one single verse I was using out of context, saying it right here. You are correct. I just wasn't reading the whole thing.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to lead people down the wrong road. That the Bible says,
Says
always
the
be
wicked
happy
man
and have trouble.
says,
Sure.
I will have no trouble.
I should have included the whole psalm, but anyway, I didn't have time for that. So, as we grow, we become intellectually aware that the world can be harsh. We hear about wars, famines, disease, disasters, death. We don't understand them. We don't know why they're happening. And oftentimes they don't affect us personally. They happen at a distance. They don't impact us too deeply. So we don't worry too much about those things. But when we come face to face with trauma, well, sometimes that means doubt can occur, turmoil going on. Whatever the challenge may be, cancer, sudden infant death, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, divorce, infertility, chronic employment, death, all kinds of things. We find ourselves sometimes in the middle of emotional, personal doubt. And these things occur, and we almost ask the inevitable question, why, Lord, is this happening to me? So, it is inexplicable suffering that causes the most turmoil. Human spirits capable of withstanding enormous discomfort and even death, if the circumstances make sense and there seems to be a reason for it. Listen to what I just said. We can withstand the enormous discomfort, even death, if the circumstances make sense and there seems to be a reason for it, or eventual good comes from it. You lose a loved one in a war. They fell on a grenade to save others. It's different than losing one in a war who decided to take their own life. We had a lot of suicides in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I've dealt with people who have lived through those things, they say, you're not going to understand if he was killed while in combat, but not by taking his own life. So sometimes we can withstand those things if the circumstances and if it makes sense. Many martyrs, political prisoners, war heroes have suffered willingly and died boldly. They understood their sacrifice. We remember the quote from Nathan Hale from American Revolution, "I only regret that I have one life to give for my country." So it's in the absence, or it is in the absence of any kind of meaning or purpose and suffering that situation becomes so confusing and intolerable. Suffering makes no sense. We find ourselves doubting, begin to wonder why God has allowed this to happen to me. Why, God, am I going through this? So when suffering and confusion are experienced personally, it's easy to feel betrayed by God. We start asking the inevitable questions. Where is God? Does God know what's happening to me right now? Why is he silent? Does he even care? Don't I deserve better than this? It's tremendously frustrating to believe in a loving God who has the power to intervene, and then he doesn't do it. Y'all have heard my stories from being in Iraq. I tell you what, I had some wrestling matches with the good Lord. A good Lord who I knew had the power to intervene. He's the creator. He's the master of the universe. Why doesn't he do something? I told you the guy asked me one time, "Chaplain, where is God in all this mess?"
What'd you say?
I said, "God's in the same place he's always been." I don't for a second believe that God likes war. But I still prayed for God's protection and guidance. If we believe that the Lord can and should rescue us from painful circumstances, but doesn't, then the frustration can escalate. Then we find ourselves going into a cycle of frustration and doubt. A spiritual crisis occurs when the expectations of faith are not realized. Disappointment, discouragement over sudden illness or tragic death. Listen to me. Listen to this. Disappointment, discouragement over sudden illness or tragic death can actually oftentimes be more severe for a believer than a non-believer. The non-believer may have expected little from life and then received nothing. The believer in Jesus, though, often expects more from a caring God, and then they can become resentful and disillusioned when they don't get everything they expect God to do. Do you understand where I'm going with this? Does that make any sense to you? So the key word here is expectation. You've heard my quote before, where there's a spirit of expectation, there will never be a spirit of gratitude. Be grateful. Be grateful. Key word here, expectation. We find ourselves in a crisis of doubt when our expectations of faith are contradicted by the reality of circumstances. We feel like the child who's told that his or her divorced father is coming to visit, and when daddy doesn't show up, the child ends up suffering more than he or she would have if daddy was never expected to come. It's profoundly discouraging and disturbing and traumatic to build one's life on a certain theological understanding and then have it collapse at a time of unusual stress and pain. A verse here from the 13th Psalm, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart?" See, your thinking is no different. Our thinking is no different. It's been around a long time. How long, Lord, are you going to allow this to happen? And then, 77th Psalm, "Will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again?" Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Yeah, psalmist had it going on right there in asking these same things we ask. So, Joseph Parker was a minister of the gospel from 1845 until his death in 1902. He says in his autobiography that up until the age of 33, he never had a religious doubt. But then his wife of 12 years died, and his faith collapsed. This is what he said in his autobiography. He says, in that dark hour, I became almost an atheist. For God set his foot upon my prayers and treated my petitions with contempt. If I had seen a dog in such agony as mine, I would have pitied and helped the dumb beast. Yet God spat upon me and cast me out as an offense, out into the waste wilderness, and the night black and starless. Whoa, was there a little depression going on here? As well as doubt. Guy is a minister. But when something tragic, unexpected happened, the death of his wife, his beloved wife, his faith collapsed.
And he didn't have true faith. He had faith in something.
I disagree with that, Lou. I think he had true
He
faith.
put it all on having good things. Nothing ever had bad happen to him.
I think we can be misguided sometimes in our faith.
But true faith means you.
But I think a person
good
could
and
lose
bad.
their faith. I don't see how you could read Hebrews and not believe that a person couldn't lose their faith. I think we can.
You know, the challenge there is for you to strengthen your faith, not.
Well, sure. I think absolutely. Doing things to strengthen our faith. You know, coming here to worship, being with each other, small groups, other things to strengthen, build one another up, what we should be doing. You know, typically people don't just stop coming to church. You don't see them every week, and then no more, unless something really dramatic happened. Normally, they'll miss a Sunday. And then a month or so go by, they might miss another one. Then a few weeks go by, miss another one. And it gets easier and easier and easier. And they get further away, and then they just stop. Does COVID ring a bell? Of how not only us, but within Christendom, people, they weren't around others of faith, and they eventually lost it totally. Faith is an interesting thing to me because when I was young, and I can remember I lived off my parents' faith, and then at some point it became my faith. And I've told you before when that happened, I was in not basic training, but in tech school, where all of a sudden I woke up one Sunday, I wasn't in church. Because basic training, up through that, I was always in church every week. Basic training, everybody was church and basic training. To those of you who have been through military basic training, you know what I'm talking about. Mainly it's to get away from your training instructor, your TI or your DI, and you could be in church. Some people went to every service at church all day long. I never did that. They were Jewish and Catholic and Mormon and everything else, all in that day. But I was in tech school and I woke up. I went to church. That was when my faith, I started living off more of my faith than my parents' faith, because then I owned it. It became mine, and did a lot of growth at that point. So faith is an evolving thing to me. I am sometimes on that mountaintop, sometimes I'm in that valley.
So this guy here, we focus on that one event in his life. Did he end up becoming a stronger Christian after this?
Yeah, I mean, he stayed in faith.
There's your answer right there.
He was just saying, here's what he went through,
Yeah.
basically.
We take a look at it. It's very easy just to hone in on that event right there and say, well, this guy doesn't have real faith. But he grew from that. And God had a story for him to live. And it's his story. And we're not in a position to determine things like that. And here is the evidence, he has become a person of greater faith because of this bad time.
Yeah.
Which is the point of him sharing this story.
Well, so I think his faith was broken down there
Yeah.
for a time and built back up, so.
Sometimes what we call faith, God answers my petitions, yes. That's not faith. We have to recognize what we're here for and what eternity is here for. And if our faith is not in eternity, then the things that happen here can rattle all of our cages.
Yes, I agree.
You know, like, when you read the Old Testament especially, you realize that God uses tribulation and suffering to bring people back, you know, and so you don't know what, he knows the end from the beginning. This man's wife might have been destined to fall away, and he took her life before she could do it. A child that dies when they're 2 years old in a family that had no hope of ever finding God is in heaven. You know, God looks at the end game. Life on earth is transitionary, and we don't see that. It's hard to see it. I'm not saying it's easy, but sometimes he uses those things to his.
And sometimes it's not about us. It's about the people watching us and us encouraging them through the way that we stay close to God.
Sure, I agree. So Jesus speaks when faith is hard. Mark 5:36, don't be afraid, just believe. Okay, all right, I'll do it. When Jesus spoke these words, Jairus, the synagogue ruler, had come to him with an important request. My little daughter's dying. Please come, put your hands on her so she'll be healed and live. Obviously, Jairus had heard Jesus was the healer, miracle worker. He truly believed Jesus had the power to heal his daughter. He fully expected his little girl would become well if Jesus would come and act. Jesus acceded to the request, but is interrupted on the way to Jairus' home. This is all in Mark chapter 5. In the midst of a pressing crowd, a diseased woman touched him and is healed. Jesus pauses for a minute to find the woman. He says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." That's a great story. The delay results in some devastating news. Some men come from the home of Jairus with the announcement, "Your daughter's dead." Why bother the teacher anymore? With this message, the hope of the father was shattered. He found Jesus. Jesus had said yes to his request. They were, in fact, on the way to his house to heal his daughter. Now, though his expectations are crushed and all seems lost, in his mind, faith in Jesus' power can accomplish nothing, for his daughter's dead. Yet Jesus challenged him not to give in to fear or doubt. That's where he says, Mark 5:36, don't be afraid, just believe. Belief and faith were not easy for the father at this point. All he saw was despair. He saw no possibilities. He saw no blessings. Jesus instructs him to continue to have faith, even when faith would appear to make no difference. He continues to the home of Jairus. You know the rest of the story, and he brings his daughter back to life. Wow. And then, Mark 9:23, everything is possible for him who believes. Jesus spoke these words to a father whose son was demon-possessed. Jesus just described from the Mount of Transfiguration, had just descended, from the Mount of Transfiguration with Peter, James, and John. It's all in Mark chapter 9. Met by a large crowd, arguing. Teachers of the law have been arguing with Jesus' disciples, apparently about their failure to heal a demon-possessed boy. Boy's father explains the situation to Jesus. The father reveals terrible things that have been happening to his son because of the demon. He expresses his deep disappointment that his disciples were unable to heal him. He turns to Jesus with a plea in chapter 9, verse 22. It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Again, in his Father's mind, faith has appeared to be useless. Isn't it funny that our Bible gives us examples of people's faith who's hurting, who's having doubt, who are there like losing their faith, or feeling like, I have faith, but it's useless. Nothing happened. Disciples failed. Perhaps he begins to wonder if anything can be done and if faith can make the difference. How can he continue to believe and hope when he's only witnessed failure? Jesus, well, just as he did with Jairus, Jesus challenges the Father to have faith. Says, if you can, everything is possible for him who believes. Mark 9:23. The circumstances may seem hopeless and faith is hard. There's always possibilities for those who believe. But I tell you what, one of the most powerful statements in this is Mark 9:24, where the Father acknowledges his doubt and he acknowledges his faith and his hurt there. And he said, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Jesus heals the boy, gets rid of the demon. Jesus continues to speak these same empowering words to us today. When the circumstances of life assault our faith, we want to cry out, what good does it believe? Where's God? Why has God allowed my life to be like this? That was the reaction of Job. Job 35. What profit is it to me? And what do I gain by not sinning? Yet in response, Jesus speaks the empowering words, don't be afraid, don't give up, you got to believe. These two fathers we just looked at, heard and witnessed experience, which seemed to indicate that faith was meaningless. Mark 5:34, they said, your daughter's dead, why bother to teach her anymore? In Mark 9:18, asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. Jesus speaks words which encourages us to have faith, even when faith doesn't seem to make sense. So then, what is the message of Jesus? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm going to tell you. Faith is always a choice. You know, you can choose, I guess, not to have faith. Even in the midst of hopeless circumstances, Jesus challenged his fathers to choose faith. Faith is not a feeling or a compulsion. It's a decision. When faced with faith or doubt, we need to choose faith. We must choose faith. In living for God and His Son, there are really only two choices, faith or doubt. Sometimes we're tempted to choose doubt. But Jesus encourages us to choose faith. Even when we're confused, even when we're doubtful, even when we're fearful, choose faith. With faith, the impossible is possible. Jesus' words to the disappointed father, undeniable, everything is possible for him who believes. Even today, faith makes possible the seemingly impossible. When life and circumstances seem unbearably hopeless, faith enables us to survive. Truly blessed faith is that which continues to believe even when faith is hard. I wouldn't want you to think that, you know, just because we come, we gather together, we're good Christian folks. Sometimes we don't sometimes we have a crisis of faith. Sometimes it's for a short time, sometimes it's for a longer time. I encourage you, if you have those times, you don't want to talk, you're welcome to come, and we can talk about things. But I believe that most all of us, probably not all of us, at some point have gone through a little crisis of faith, be it something that happened in our lives or whatever it might be. We've been down those roads. Why is this happening, Lord? We seek answers for those things. Sometimes we don't get those answers. You know, the death of Jesus made faith especially challenging for the disciples. I mean, think about this. Don't you think it was pretty hard to continue to believe in Jesus when he's in a tomb? Do you reckon they had a little crisis of faith? I would submit that they did. We believed in Jesus, great guy, did all these great, wonderful things, healed people, raised the dead, but he is dead. He is dead, D-E-A-D, dead. And he's in that tomb right there. That was a rough weekend, wasn't it? Yeah. But after the resurrection, almost everybody believed. Remember, almost everybody believed? And one still doubted. Remember that?
That saw Jesus believed.
Yeah.
The one that didn't said, "You're probably making it up."
Yeah. There's something over here.
When something tragic happens, people sometimes inadvertently blame God. They say, well, it was God's will. Or, I was teaching school, a teacher's grandson was run over by a car and died. He was 6 years old, 5 or 6. We had this small gathering, the faculty, and it was in Memphis, the South, and it's okay to talk about God in the South at school. We had a 4th grade teacher who was a self-ordained minister, but she stood up there and said, God needed that precious child. God wanted that child. So God took that child. I couldn't stand it. I said, no. I just interrupted her speech.
Good for you. That was total ignorance. Go ahead.
I'm usually going to be quiet.
No.
But I said, we live in a fallen world. God doesn't pick and choose who he wants to take and then cause pain and suffering. I said, God loves that child, and God loves that mother and loves our teacher here. And I just couldn't stand it. I said, if it gives them peace, okay, but God's not going to just pick and choose.
That's bad.
That's hard to hear.
There's some things that we don't understand, and some of the times people say things like everything happens for a reason. I don't believe that. Write a book one day and things not to say.
There were no answers. It's just that.
But we don't like that. We like to have our answers. We want to go to our Wikipedia and find the answer.
And that was the answer she offered.
It was a very, very bad answer, because it'd been better with no answer. It's just a tragedy. We're here for you. We love you.
Well, look at Job. God portrayed him as one of the most righteous men on the earth at that time.
Yeah.
And it was God's will to take all of his, God didn't take all his kids away from him. That was the devil.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in that story, right, the devil comes and says, he only believes in you because of the stuff, right? And so the devil takes that angle, which unfortunately is often true. We only believe in God because he gave us nice stuff. And that's the angle the devil takes. And the devil says, hey, he doesn't believe in you for nothing. And so the devil puts that plan together, and notice God didn't say no. I mean, he could have, right? Shouldn't God have just said, well, no, we're not doing that to Job, that good guy, we're not going to do that. But God didn't say that. He said, okay. And that's where we struggle, because we say, Job's the good guy, and yet God said, okay, go ahead, take the stuff away. And we struggle with that, because we want to believe that because we believe in Jesus and we believe in God, God is just going to give us all the good stuff. And that's the way life is always going to be. But nowhere does God and Jesus tell us that our belief in him gives us the right to live the good life. And
Jesus tells us the opposite.
Yeah, it tells us the opposite. But we don't want to listen to that, right? And so a lot of times we miss that, and we allow the fact that life is hard, suffering, difficult to trample on our faith. But yet, like in Job, God said, okay, Job's going to suffer. We don't want to suffer.
We don't think it's fair, and we believe only in fair.
But the Bible kind of tells us, hey, you're going to suffer. But when we suffer, what are we supposed to do? Turn to God.
Shane is determined to take my job.
Don't be afraid. Let's just have faith.
I often have wondered where people get some of the things they do about the Bible, about God, how he works with his people, such as, and it's widespread, and you become Christian, all these good things are going to happen to you. And that's just simply not the case, not here on earth. Yeah, I expect great good things once I'm in heaven, but it doesn't tell us all these great, wonderful things. Now, we have good, wonderful byproducts of things, such as when something bad does happen, you know you guys are my support system, right?
Yes.
As I should be your support system as well. We have fellow Christians. I mean, that is good. Don't get me wrong, that when a tragedy happens to us versus an unbeliever, I'm not saying that the unbeliever doesn't necessarily have other people, but I got the best folks in the world around me right now. Whereas those people, well, sometimes the atheist friends don't want to get involved with all that, and they'll kind of walk away from them. And you know, I'm not saying all atheists are bad. I'm not saying that, because I've known some atheist folks who were good people, but were unbelievers. Anyway, let me finish this up. You know, as whatever had mentioned about Thomas, John 20:25, Thomas asserted, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, put my finger where the nails were, put my hand to his side, I will not believe it. Eventually, he saw it, he touched the risen Lord, and he come to believe. Jesus told him, he said, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen me, yet have believed. That's us. Faith that is blessed is that which continues to believe when all circumstances and evidence points to unbelief. Yeah. So, ain't she pretty? Any questions? Like I said, I went over. Sorry. That preacher. Get that clown to cut his sermon short.
When we get challenged, we're gonna all meet together for our support group.
You can come to ladies' class on Tuesday morning. That's
And you know, I guess I was thinking more as people just come out to you. But yeah, I mean, we have support groups. We have our small groups. You've heard me say it here before. We're a support group for recovering sinners. We help each other out. Sometimes we have our doubts and our fears and things, and however much we allow others into our lives to see those things, we oftentimes don't. That's why I always encourage people, if they won't ever come and talk to me, because I look out there, I see people looking pretty and wearing pretty clothes and smelling good and all like that, but I know that things happen and things are going on in people's minds a lot of times. There's private sufferings that only you know about. And you just don't share those things. And used to, back when people used to come down front, they only came down front with their safe sense. That's a terrible way to put that. But I think you know what I mean. They didn't come down talking about anything sexual. Right? Do you agree with me? I mean, they came down talking about, I suffer with pride. Okay. I'm not as kind as I should be, or I offended somebody because I didn't let them sit in my pew Sunday. I told them to go somewhere else. We need to help one another and share things with one another. Be careful who you share with, but do those things. Help build each other's faith up. Don't become a casualty. That's all I have. I'm sorry I went over. Any last comments? Thanks for being here, and we will see you Wednesday night Bible class. We're getting started back this week. Men's class is this week, isn't it?
Yep.
And women's starts next week, right?
10th.
The 10th. So there you have all those. God bless you. Have a great week.
Thank you.